power scaling is stupid. And power scaling these characters, trying to power scale my favorite depressed elf show, that's really stupid. Not a personal attack or anything, but I do not get attempts to power scale Frieren. To line these mages up and attach arbitrary power to them to determine who is the strongest. I mean, when you can't really power scale, I think it directly misses the point of the magic system. Not to mention the characters or, the plot. There's even a character who is a power scaler, who gets embarrassed. Others that break all laws of conventional comparisons. You can't power scale Frieren, and I have supporting arguments and all that other stuff to prove it. Starting that Frieren doesn't have 1v1 fair fights. The magic system in Frieren is somehow both more complicated and simpler than something that can be power scaled. Mainly because it's not about numbers or even really getting stronger. It's about the plot and characters. It's simpler than systems with complex rules governing them, since magic is used in a much more flexible way by those with strong visualization. More complex since fights have more room for actual creativity, not just comparing numbers. This isn't the type of story where we get 1v1 fights that Goku, Vegeta, Fox only type duels. It's a story where the party has already taken down the big bad, and then they have to leg it away from some random monster. So does this mean a random monster scales above the Demon King? No, the magic system in Frieren is a bit different than just slapping numbers on everyone and forcing them into a tier list, like they're pools in a gacha game. You can't really directly compare everyone 1v1 without making far too many assumptions. It's more nuanced, and we can't do a ranking that says Suri is stronger than Kraft based on some random feat. Because what are we assuming from that fight? That it's the two of them in a wasteland, in a very specific set of circumstances. If we measured up Frieren v Suri, who is the strongest? Who's the strongest mage? Well, we're assuming so much that it's essentially fan fiction. Yeah, we can probably say Suri would win. She views magic as a tool, and Frieren's view of it is much more fun in the current day. But a 1v1 fight? Do we know Frieren can't pull something dirty and win anyway? Her whole thing is pulling something dirty to win anyway. How do we scale dirty tricks? A 1v1 fight where everyone is just fighting head to head to measure strength, it's fan fiction. I'm sure there's some 1v1 ideas that you could all think of that are interesting, but it's not usually how action happens in the series. It's never a basic fair fight. There's counters, there's strategy, there's more than just mana. I think there's a tendency to try and put everything into this objective numbers-based system where plots are simplistic and it just comes down to pulling a higher number, to giving everyone a score and letting that measurement define a world, to define interactions. It's like an RPG where we're just looking for a higher level or mana, but this isn't an RPG. The higher number doesn't always decide things. Frieren has specifically been defeated by mages with less mana. It's not entirely rock, paper, scissors or some kind of weaknesses and strengths system either, though. Yeah, a good warrior can rush an unprotected mage no matter how much mana they have. Himmel could slice up most mages before they can even react. Does that mean he scales higher? Maybe in a 1v1 fight, which no mage with a weakness like that would basically ever end up in. There's even some mages with better tools for close combat, so even the close beats long weakness thing isn't really a way to power scale in Frieren. Because Frieren's magic system has nuance. The system of combat in Frieren is well thought out, it's interesting, it's the kind of setup which can make for a lot of discussion. But why can't that discussion be a power ranking? Well, we see mages blasting everything away with these crazy powerful attacks. Their mana isn't the be-all and end-all. They could just get stabbed. There are classes, roles, different types of fighter. There's strategy, counters, there's always the off chance that some specific weakness in a mage's repertoire could prove their undoing. That's never happened, right? Spells and attacks have nuance, they have ability, they aren't a measure of the mana alone, it's a specific technique or visualizing something happening. You can be a mage with less mana and manage a technique which takes out a mage with more. If you're trying to power scale Frieren with the strength of spells, it just doesn't work. Zoltrak's a good example. In the opening arc, when an unfrozen Quall wakes up and finds out he's been power crept, but not in the mana level kind of way. People thought about his trick quite a bit, and then they figured out how it worked and how to work around it way. They just countered the technique, so he got stomped. So how do we power scale this? If we're comparing Frieren and, say, bomb with a shotgun? Do we have to take into account whether Frieren has had 50 years with other mages to figure out the shotgun? Does she already have a spell to make the shotgun vanish? Like Batman with prep time and a community? Or do we see that Frieren utilizing human connection through magic, working with others to beat Qual? It isn't actually all that simple. In fact, it's kind of missing the point to attach an arbitrary strength to the Zoltrak and say that's why Qual lost. His number was smaller. Later, we even get Fern's Zoltrak being too quick for a healing factor to negate. That's a difference which is in technique. It's not that Fern has a higher mana power rating than the hero's party did. The spell has been worked on, it's been improved. The magic is more nuanced than mana levels and power scaling. Ubo could kill a mage much stronger through visualization, through imagining it. Frieren's a powerful mage, but she's not good with poisons. Iva could be ran through with a sword or hit by an arrow if the circumstances were right too. We can't really reduce the magic system down to power levels. The magic system is more soft than it is hard. There's openness. Ubo's whole thing of imagination-based magic is kind of this, there's science to it, but clearly it's open enough to allow imagination to be a major part of things. I mean, there's room for mages who study, who understand every element of something to do it, and there's room for those who act on instinct as well. That's much more entertaining, and it allows for a greater exploration of the characters, which here is a bit more important. There's so much more to these spells and how they work than just number bigger. Plus, raw numbers are boring. Creativity in action is entertaining. Making fights come down to personal stakes to ground it in character and plot is much more entertaining than comparing Suri's raw mana to Frieren. Number fight is incredibly dull. It's reductive to how the actual power system works. How would we power scale this kind of magic system? One where imagination is more important. One example people use is mana and access to certain spells, but that kind of goes against how we're directly told it works, because bigger mana is not always better. Bigger mana number equals bigger power rankings, right? No, not really. I mean, they might have more mana, but that's not the answer. Frieren has lost multiple times to mages with less mana. We can't really boil it down to feats and mana because every fight is different. It's a breathing world, not a random enemy encounter. I mean, there's environmental elements to consider where a fight is taking place. We see a mage who is powerful in some situations, completely limited by the lack of weather. It's not just a matter of a ranking. You can't put a power ranking on a strong imagination and good visualization skills because it's not the kind of thing that can be quantified, to be reduced down to a number alone. A mage could be hanging out like this and they'd get cheap-shotted, sucker-punched, irrelevant of their power level. Mana isn't a system where spells from those who are weaker have no effect, like chucking a key blast at someone. A mage with much more mana can be stopped through thoughtful tactics, as we found out when we saw Frieren up against a power scaler. Aura is kind of a power scaler. She's constantly taking the feats of Superman and trying to compare them to the achievements of some characters and some random shonen. Well, I mean, I assume that's how she spends her downtime, that and eating the apples. But she does look at power levels and judges entirely based on that. It tells her all she needs to know. Aura has a magical technique using scales where she weighs the mana of her and of an opponent, giving whoever loses control. Literally, she does power ranking nonsense in real time. So in theory, it's a fight where higher mana would be the be-all and end-all, but Aura is absolutely full of hubris because it's a terrible, terrible way to fight. Suppressed mana tricks her. Her ability alone only seems to have kept her safe because it's set up to defend against being rushed by a different kind of fighter. Yet it doesn't work out for her. Frieren points out if Aura had used more interesting tactics, she would have had a better chance, since fights are more than just mana. She could have used her overwhelming numbers, that would have made it harder. But Aura makes it a pure power ranking thing, a 1v1 measuring contest, and she fails because the strategy, subterfuge. Frieren uses her suppressed mana to trick demons. That's strategy. Lugna, after being defeated, how the main party is fighting isn't fair. It's a disgrace. Clearly the party isn't tied to the idea of a straight-up fight playing fair. Dirty tricks are more important. This has been Frieren's MO for a while. As Flammy puts it, run, hide, take your enemies by surprise. There are plenty of other options. More mana doesn't mean winner. Mana simply measures time spent training it, not creativity. Between this and being shown that mana doesn't decide fights, surely this should be enough to understand we can't just directly compare numbers in this context. Ubel is kind of an anti-power scaler. Her abilities come purely from visualization, from imagining things. How do you quantify that? As we can see with Ubel, a stab can still kill no matter the other powers or skills. There's always going to be room for underhanded tricks, for basic dick moves to win, not just mana. Then there's her fight with the instructor's clone in the second mage exam. I mean, how do you power scale that? Does it mean Ubel is stronger? The belief that you can reduce the nuances of life down to a single thing, a power rating, it's reductive. It's reductive to the action, to the creativity involved in these fights, but it's also reductive for understanding the characters and the world. Frieren has depth beyond a number. Flashbacks with Flammy kind of imply this. They're just using a dirty trick to spite demons because they approach mana like it's a power ranking. Lidora can't understand the complexity. Apparently power scalers can't either. Later in the manga, there's specific cases where we get to see the limitations of mages as a whole. That simple attacks can take them down in the right circumstances. Even a basic weapon, because it's not what magic does. Because Frieren is on a journey of human connection. It isn't about strength. I mean, who's the strongest? Is Frieren stronger than Suri? What's strongest? Strongest at collecting spells? At killing major opponents? At hiding mana? At having lots of mana? At buying gifts? What's the metric for Frieren power rankings? Because everything requires different skills, and even each individual fight requires different skills. It isn't as simple as one outright strongest rating. Frieren can't be power scaled in the traditional sense. Not without making insane leaps in logic to quantify the nuanced and the vague. One part of power scaling is to try and keep a logical consistency, often in a world where new heights must be constantly hit to build hype. But Frieren's power system is already consistent. It doesn't need that. You don't need to attach numbers or comparisons to these characters, because this isn't a story about growing stronger and fighting bigger opponents. It's about character. It's after the biggest opponents have already been killed. Magic isn't supposed to be a tool for comparing fighting power. Flammy teaches Frieren magic for fighting, for revenge, but in the end, wants to teach her the flower spell. The thing that made her love magic. Magic as a tool is better for human connection than for fighting. You can't power scale that. So why try to force a numbered, objective view into things? I think the intention comes down to wanting an objective ranking, one that's not based on opinion, to be able to say this is objectively right, and I am objectively right because of it. But you can't. This is inherently opinion. This has been my opinion, that power scaling Frieren is stupid, but a power ranking in this kind of anime can't be anything more than subjective. An opinion. It's not possible to power scale the way you can use magic to build connections. Hey, thanks for watching. If you like this, there's probably more on the screen now. Cheers.